Intellyx Brainwave Problem Solvers. How will AI and low-code technologies work together? With Tejas Gadhia, Product Manager of Zoho Creator.
Cloud native, SD-WAN, analytics, machine learning, agile development and testing, edge computing, DevOps, service management, enterprise architecture, hybrid IT, neural networks, cybersecurity, serverless, low-code, no-code, big data, integration. You're listening to the Intellyx podcast, where we bridge modern and legacy technology and untangle the buzzwords to help business and IT leaders connect the dots to achieve digital transformation. Disclaimer: the perspectives expressed in this show are the independent opinions of the hosts and/or guests and do not necessarily reflect the position of Intellyx or any companies mentioned here. And now, your host, Charles Araujo.
If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that there's never a shortage of challenges that the enterprise must be prepared to face and overcome. There are always problems to solve. And there are two classes of technologies that have gained increased prominence in the last few years for their ability to help enterprise leaders solve some of their most pressing problems: AI and low code. My name is Charles Araujo, and I'm principal analyst with Intellyx and today's host of the Brainwave Problem Solvers podcast. The question that we'll explore today is what happens when you put these two powerful and emerging technologies together, and how can their combination help enterprise leaders solve problems in all new ways? I'm joined today by Tejas Gadhia, product manager for Zoho Creator, who is going to help us dive into this fascinating intersection. Tejas, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, I think the place we need to start is with AI, right? It's hard to open your email or, talk to anybody almost without something about AI just sort of hitting you in the face today. To say that there's a lot of hype around it is a massive understatement. So can you start maybe by helping us separate some of that hype from the practical value that an enterprise leaders can, reasonably expect to get from AI?
Yeah, that's a really good start. I mean, I would say the AI term in general is a fairly all-encompassing one. A lot of times AI, ML, and machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, these are all terms that are often thrown around interchangeably, especially in marketing context. So identifying, what does what is pretty important. Generally speaking, the way I look at it is AI is kind of like the overall concept. And then inside of that is machine learning. So machine learning is more of a technique that achieves a level of AI. But at a basic level, AI is just basically having a computer or a machine or a software do something that we previously thought required some human to basically do. And we're either automating it or making it a process that the machine essentially can do, make some intelligent decisions ultimately, and just be smart about the actions that we thought only humans were able to kind of infer and make a decision upon. So that's at a very basic level, just understanding the baseline of what AI is and kind of how we're categorizing it. But I mean, in terms of what value you really get, ultimately, I think you can kind of break it down into two main categories. The first one is productivity. Ultimately, any kind of AI you're trying to leverage is we want to make something more productive, whether at a very basic level, it could be, building something quicker than you thought you normally would be able to do it, or just making sure that you're more efficient with your time, essentially, because the computer is handling some of that decision-making workload on your behalf. And the second half of AI, practical value is really along the lines of more data and insights, kind of understanding, and that might go a little bit more in the machine learning category, but it's more taking a look at maybe historical trends of data that you have, and then giving you some inferences and ideas about what decisions you can make for the future based on that. So that's kind of the two main categories I'd put it in: productivity and then insights.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating because the secret to good hype is having those kernels of truth, right? And I think a lot of the stuff we see is talking about elements of that, and there is so much truth in it that I think the trick is where people sell it like it's this out of the box, you just turn it on and off it goes, and that's sometimes where we see the challenges. I mean, is that sort of when you see the difference between hype and value? Is that some of what you're seeing?
Yeah, yes and no. I think sometimes there can be AI implementations that are happening behind the scenes that you never even see or witness that kind of just help you guide you along a process even better. And it's not something that, normally you would ever consider. So maybe you take something like you sign up for some web service and you get the introduction and the onboarding kind of screens, and you're going through it. And those screens you think might be kind of static, and everybody kind of sees the same screens when they sign up. But there might be some kind of algorithm happening in the background that, based on maybe my location, maybe based on my demographics or whatever information they might have gathered about me before or during that sign up period, they're going to dynamically change those screens up and have that kind of information happen. And they basically know that, oh, this guy's from Texas and, he makes X amount and works in this industry. Maybe we'll show him some examples or use cases that he relates to a little bit more. And so he might sign up for our software or pay us money, basically. So that's like some behind the scenes things that as a user, I would never see, but I do get it. I see value out of that because I'm seeing a more personalized approach to an onboarding session that might have been a little bit more generalized. But then there's the more hands-on approach to AI where I have control over something. I'm going to say, look, this is my process, this is my data, and I need to be able to infer information, or I'm trying to build something out. And is there a process where maybe a certain stage is getting stuck and it's taking 7 days to move to the next stage versus 3, or maybe a certain sales rep or employee is taking 12 days to verify a record versus 4 days, and identifying those kind of anomalies and things like that can all be helpful as well. So that's like me having control over things and seeing it and being able to adjust based on that information. And then sometimes just being on the receiving end of it can be beneficial as well too.
Well, and I think that one of the challenges with AI is that it is one of those that at least from my standpoint, one of the things that sort of separates the hype from the reality is exactly how challenging it can be to build the models and to put them into deployment and all of that. And that actually leads us to what I think we really want to dive into today, and that what happens when you combine AI and low code to maybe remove some of that complexity. And so while we're in the mode of defining things, why don't you maybe kind of give us your definition of what a low code platform is for people that maybe aren't as familiar with the term, just so that we're all kind of starting from the same place as we examine this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty fitting that the topics are AI and low code because both are pretty muddily defined terms in terms of that's the popular word that everybody's associated with it, but they mean a lot of different things and encompass a lot of different aspects to it. At a high level, any kind of low code tool is basically similar to AI, something that increases your productivity. It enables you to do something faster, quicker, more efficiently in an organized manner that you normally wouldn't be able to do unless you were kind of maybe using it or building that with more raw or scratch tools. So instead of coding an application completely from scratch, creating a database, setting up a server, provisioning your security and updates and all that kind of stuff, that would be manual work that would happen. Low code is like, look, we'll take care of all this back-end baggage for you. And all you got to worry about is generally business logic is kind of where low code wants to be at. So defining processes, defining how data is kind of organized, creating workflows, things along those lines that ultimately enable productivity, but also empowers a lot more people to build things. So before, building applications and solving problems was something that was only in the hands of maybe an IT team or, a techie type person. But now somebody who's not very, technically forward, but understands the basics of maybe an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, they see how data is kind of organized in columns and rows, and, you click on something and something else happens. Now I can build something that either makes my own life easier every single day, can make my team's life easier every single day, departmental, share information, that kind of stuff. It's just a scalable way of solving problems, long story short.
All because Right, because you don't have to be worrying about knowing the syntax of having to code. You're able to just focus on logic. So, okay, well, so I think that helps. So I want to step back to one of the things you said earlier, that AI is sort of this broad term, as I believe that as well, and that there's all these sort of different types. So when we're thinking about this specifically in terms of the intersection of AI and low code, what are the types of AI that we should be thinking about or kind of aware of?
So I think it goes back to kind of what I hinted on a little bit earlier. There's generally, at Zoho, we kind of categorize it in two different buckets. One is platform level AI. So that kind of goes maybe to the onboarding example or, helping someone build a more efficient process. And so an example of that would be, let's say you're building maybe a new employee onboarding process, right? And we've got, we have an understanding of that through our HR applications. We've got an understanding on that based on the millions of other applications that have been built on the low-code platform. And so when you go and build it, you might create it a certain way, and we'll give you suggestions saying, hey, maybe you forgot to capture the candidate's birthday. Maybe you forgot to capture this, benefits package information. And we'll give you those suggestions along the way that you normally wouldn't know about. So that's kind of more along the guided platform level stuff. And then there's the data-oriented things, which I think people find a little bit more tangible or hands-on. And that's things like image classification, forecasting, anomaly detection, image classification, what do you call it, text to speech or an image to text, OCR recognition, things like that, that you kind of can see with your own eyes that I put in this information and now the computer or the machine or the software is basically spitting out some level of insights for me that I don't have to do myself.
So if I'm, let me try to process and translate this, make sure I get it. Because actually, I'm someone that has done quite a bit of study around AI, and I don't think I've heard it categorized in sort of these ways. So I'm actually quite intrigued by this. So you're saying that data AI is sort of the probably more traditional use cases, or the way we think about it, of looking for patterns in the data to identify an insight that I might leverage in some way. Is that what that is?
Yeah, I think that's what most people probably equate it to, just because it's the most easily relatable and identifiable use case.
Okay. And then platform AI, you're saying, I actually don't know that I fully was following that. So explain platform AI, meaning it's like embedded into a platform. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say it's more the behind the scenes things that are happening to make sure that what you're building is good. So in the low code space, generally, the biggest problem that we end up seeing is that there's a pros and cons of democratizing this application development. The pro is more people can develop apps and people who aren't very technical can build apps. And the harsh reality is that people who don't know how to build apps very well, they tend to build pretty bad apps. They're just not able to design things very well. And it's not a knock on them. It's just, it's not their primary skill set and their primary job function. So it's not a focus that they do. So at the platform level, we have to basically help that person out to build applications better. So that's suggesting relationships, suggesting workflows, identifying issues, preventing duplication of data, cleansing the data that comes in, organizing all that backend stuff that you might either take for granted and not realize that it's happening. It's happening, and it magically makes your application building experience better and ultimately yields better results when you go and run reports and figure out what this app is doing.
I'm chuckling a little bit to myself here because, as my kids will tell you, sometimes I have to hear the same words twice to understand them. So, because you basically said the same thing, and it's like it just finally clicked. So, what you're really saying is, so platform AI is you're talking about, this is AI that, for instance, you guys have built into your platform to help me as a user build an app more easily. So from a low code perspective, it's sort of, I'm as the app builder in low code, I'm the consumer of this AI, versus the data AI is the distinction that you're drawing here to say that that's AI that I'm applying in my app for my ultimate consumer of that app. Is that how you're okay? Yeah,
two sides of the same coin that ultimately make you build better apps.
Got it. All right. Makes perfect sense. Like I said, you just had to tell me twice so I could get it through my thick head. Okay, perfect. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the use cases then here. So I think the platform AI I get, are there any, when we think in terms of low code, I mean, obviously that would seem like that's a win. People should be looking for platforms that are embedding AI into it to help solve some of the problems of people developing apps that you talked about. Are there any special gotchas or special parts of this from a use case perspective that I should be looking at?
Yeah, I would say the primary one that we see people generally get the most benefit out of is really data modeling. And so just the idea of, you go and create a low-code application, and most of them are data-oriented or database-oriented, where you're chucking a bunch of information in, organizing it in some way, and probably wanting to report on it in some way, and could be pulling it from a couple of different applications or data sources. And so what ends up happening is that the reason you're organizing this information is not just to have it, neatly stacked in a certain place. It's to really be able to run reports, analyze it, see charts and graphs, and sorting and organization of that data. And the way that can happen, the way you can get better insights and build better reports, is if that data is related and organized properly. And so, I mean, even at a very basic level, let's say we take what most people can probably relate to as an Excel sheet, and you have a bunch of numbers in a column, right? So Excel, if you type in, 5 in a cell and press enter, that number goes to the right-hand side, right? And Excel has basically identified that this is a number, not a text or something. And now on that 5 cell, I can do some mathematical functions that I wouldn't be able to do if I typed, the word Charlie in the cell, right? The same types of functions aren't happening. I wouldn't call that necessarily AI. That's a little bit more just, classification of objects, but that gets extrapolated into a bigger sense. And so being able to run reports and analytics and insights based on information in a lot of different places that information needs to be connected generally through like unique identifying keys, and it could be a whole manual process. There's whole database administrators whose full-time job it is to basically maintain these relationships and structures, and the low-code platform will basically take care of all this for you. So kind of ranting here, but I guess at a very practical example would be, let's say you have a CRM application and this low-code application. Maybe your low-code application is some commission calculating based on deals that are closing in your CRM. So your CRM sends your information to this low-code app, and based on maybe a deal ID or the deal name or the amount, it'll connect it, and we can have that commission linked to that CRM. The linkings are extremely important, and people who make bad links, make duplicate links, make incorrect links, really prevent the amount of reporting you can do, because the reporting is only based on connected data. We can't connect data that's not connected or report on it. And so identifying good data models is the core foundation of a good application build. Most new applications, even if you're coding from scratch, starting at the database layer and organizing that data structure is the first step any professional developer will tell you that they need to tackle before they get into logic and design and all the other things that are just kind of layers on top of it.
Yeah, it's funny, as I've seen some of that firsthand, and I think it addresses two problems really for a citizen developer or a business user developer who's trying to build a low-code app. And the first is maybe not understanding things like data models, right? Just having that, lack of understanding of sort of the science behind that, of why that's all important, and that you have to choose them carefully, as you're saying. So I think that's great from that. The other is just ignorance. Like, I don't even know what's out there, and that, right? Because we sort of are suffering from that same problem where we have all of this data. And in this case, it's the data model itself is in effect metadata, right? And being able to figure out what's what and how it applies is difficult. And so having something like a platform AI to help do that, kind of helps me bridge that gap. And what I'm assuming is ultimately what you're all about is just create a better app faster, right? And so, that's what this is coming down to.
Sorry to cut you off. One thing I'd just quickly add there. See, the best part about these low-code apps is when we have more people building things, we have people who are closer to the problems solving them with the low-code application. Generally, what would happen is I got to hire a developer or talk to my IT team. That IT guy has no idea what I do in my day-to-day life, the types of problems I face, the things they're relying on my description of that problem, which evolve over time, or maybe I just can't describe it very well, and can't describe it in terms that they understand. And so that real-life experience logic is really where your developer, I would say, your skill set really is. Everything else below it, the baggage of data models and workflows and things like that, that's not what a low-code developer wants to worry about. They're solving a problem because they have deep, intimate knowledge of a process from a firsthand experience perspective. And the rest of it is just basically building blocks that help them translate that knowledge into a digital process or a digital storage system.
So let's switch gears, because then the next question is, well, how do then I use AI to build better versions of those apps and to make it a better experience for the people that are using the apps I'm building on this low-code platform? And that's really what the data AI is. And I know for me, so I'm a Zoho Creator user. I've played with it and used it. And I'll be honest, I see those little at the bottom on the left side, the little data fields that are all the Zia, right? The Zia. And they scare me a little bit. It's like, oh, well, what happens? What is this going to do? And I'm not sure what to do with it. So, I mean, so describe some of the use cases of the ways that people can actually use this type of technology and in your product or any low code product that has this. And are there guardrails? Are there things they should be worried about? And what is the real benefit of being able to apply it in a low code type setting?
Yeah, good question. Guardrails are extremely important because, going back to what I just said, the person building the application has deep domain knowledge or expertise, but not necessarily AI knowledge. And, it's kind of, you don't want to open the floodgates of AI capabilities to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, because they're just not going to utilize it very well themselves. And so there has to be some level of guardrails for, I would say, the typical user, and then some level of hyper customization for a power user who knows what they're doing and just wants to take advantage of the AI platform itself. And so at a very basic level, what generally we see is a lot of times our applications in low code are generally customer facing. And so some customers interfacing with this data on an internal process. Let's make it simple and call it, I've got a pizza shop, and a customer places an order through the app, they order a pizza, the pizza store gets the order, updates the status like your Domino's tracker, basically, right? Tells you it's in the oven, it's on the route, click to see a map, all that kind of stuff. And then the customer gets the piece of info or the pizza at their door, and they say, how was your experience? You get it, right? So generally, let's just take that small aspect of feedback collection, right? Generally what happens is, you might have a star rating 1 to 5, and you'll have like a comment box. And in that comment box, people can write whatever they want to. And maybe people, normally you would have to go through and individually read through each one of these comment box submissions to figure out what's going on. And maybe you read 1,000 reviews or whatever, and you yourself in your head can't really correlate all these thousands and distribute them into what are the primary issues people are facing, right? Or what are the primary things they like about us. So maybe what we can do is we can analyze all the comment box data that we have, and we'll say, look, people really love our delivery drivers. They think they're the nicest people in the world. They're super friendly. And, that's a big asset that we have. We should utilize them more, take advantage of that in some way, shape, or form. But people think that our crust is burnt 90% of the time. I see the word burnt coming up all the time, crispy, overcooked, whatever. And we can take all that information, organize it, analyze it, and identify the things that people like and the things that people don't like. And then we can even automatically say, if someone submits a negative review, it might get escalated and I get a message on my phone directly saying, hey, somebody left a negative review. And imagine if I could call that customer 5 minutes later and be like, hey, I'm sorry that pizza's not working out for you. Can we send you another one? Can we send you a coupon? What can we do? Versus normally those might go into like an email box and you read it the next day and, you're not really identifying it. So that's probably the best real life example of a pizza shop that is really analyzing large quantities of comment box text and analyzing it and making decisions and creating workflows based on that.
So I know we're about to wrap up here, but I do have one last question on that one, because what I'm curious about is how do you help your customers overcome what I call the imagination gap, right? Because I think the hard part is that still is kind of whiz-bangy kind of stuff, right? All bordering science fiction, even though we're all used to consuming services like that now. We all have smart assistants in our phone or in our phones and in our homes and what have you. If I was creating that app, I would probably not think that would be something that would be available for me to roll out. So how are you helping your customers kind of broaden their view of what's even possible using a tool like yours?
You're giving the alley-oop here, Charlie, because that goes back to the platform AI level things. And so for us as a platform builder or provider, ultimately what we can do is we can identify you've created a text box called feedback and you're getting a bunch of responses. And now we can give you a suggestion inside the product and say, hey, look, you've got this field called feedback or comments and it's receiving a bunch of information. Did you know that you could do some analysis based on this? And basically we'll suggest you to implement the AI for your service. And so that's the biggest thing. A lot of times is you don't know what you don't know, like you said before. And so we, as the provider of the platform or any good low-code platform for that matter, should be suggesting use cases to the user. And once you suggest enough, then that imagination starts building in. Then they're like, well, what else can I do? Maybe I want to have customers take a picture of the pizza and we'll analyze every single picture of a pizza. And if any one of them is like, you get a box of pizza and it's like bent on its side and like all mushy or whatever, then we know it's a bad picture, or there's not enough pepperonis on this picture. We can analyze all those pictures and say, hey, oh yeah, that's not enough. Let's send you more next time or send you a coupon or whatever it is, right? So it'll suggest ideas to get the creative juices kind of flowing. And then hopefully the low-code application developer can take those ideas and then kind of run with it from there to build their own use cases out.
Okay, and I know I'm showing that I've watched too many sci-fi movies, but I don't need to be worried about AI suggesting that we build more AI, right? That's not going to lead to any bad outcomes, right?
Not yet. We're still in the safe zone.
I know. All right, so as we're coming to the end of our time together, and I always want to wrap up with something both a little bit forward-looking but still practical. So here's my question for you. Where's all this going? And what is the most important thing that an enterprise leader should be doing right now to prepare for that future?
Ooh, and on a high note there. Ultimately, I think enterprise leaders should really keep their eyes open to all the possibilities that are out there. A lot of times there's fear of kind of allowing everybody in the workforce to build applications could be dangerous and kind of scary and overwhelming, and the fear of people making bad applications. And then you have security and compliance and privacy and all these concerns to take care of. But a lot of these low-code platforms, they incorporate those governance measures for I would say, enterprise IT leaders. And really, they should start with a small pilot program, pick an individual team or department, give them a chance, and kind of have them be, I think, a popular term that's enterprisey is like a center of excellence. Whether people use it or not, I don't really care. Just call them your advocates within the organization who, they test something, they see if it works, see if it increases their productivity, see if it makes their lives better. And then you kind of deploy it. Just throwing it out there for the whole organization is usually a failing strategy. It's better to start small and slowly increase the scope over time. And I think people will generally see that letting more people in their organization solve problems based on their own personal experiences and deep knowledge of what they do on their day-to-day life will really increase their company productivity and make their employees happier because they're not doing as much manual stuff that's just kind of a time waste.
Yeah, not to answer my own question, but it's certainly something, I come from the enterprise side, and something that I definitely saw back then and certainly see now as I talk with my friends that are still executives within large enterprises is the more you experiment, the more you sort of open those doors and give people the tools to, as you said, start, the people that are closest to the challenges, start giving them the tools to address them. That it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? As they become more familiar with it, it starts closing that imagination gap. They start, like you said, asking the question, well, what else can I do with it? And so for enterprise leaders who are able to sort of overcome some of that initial fear. And I think, that what we didn't talk about is this intersection of low code and AI are these two sort of nebulous terms. They're very buzzy, very hypey. And that, as anyone who's been in the trenches for a while, those immediately throw off, all these warning signals. It's like, well, I need to be really cautious and careful here. And so, getting past that and saying, I can do this, I can experiment and play with this, but in a controlled fashion. And that the objective is that we can create real value, that I think those organizations are finding tremendous success with it. And I'm sure you're seeing that with your clients.
Yeah, for sure. You couldn't have said it better.
All right. Well, Tejas, thank you so much for being with us today. I think it's been a great conversation. I hope that people look at both what you guys are doing and just explore this idea of how they can bring AI and low code together to create real value in their organization. So thanks for being with us again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and always a pleasure talking to you, Charlie.
All right. And that is it for us on this episode of the Brainwave Podcast. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Intellyx podcast. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, feel free to drop us an email at pr@intellyx.com. Until next time, keep on transforming.